Tel Aviv 360, Israel's largest and most diverse podcast.
Hi everyone, thank you for listening to us. Today we're joined. I'm speaking in English because we're joined with Professor Shai Davidai. He knows Hebrew very well, but we thought it might be interesting to have this discussion. I thought it might be interesting to have this discussion in English. Shai is a professor, was a professor, will be a professor. We'll talk about it. Social psychologist at Columbia University. Was a very prominent figure both in academia, in the world of social psychology, studying pretty woke stuff, pretty leftist stuff, right? Social justice, how people, but not only, like thinking biases and right, and coming from the lab of in Cornell, right? Tom Gilovich, and then moving to the New School in New York, and then Columbia University. Lots of work on fundamental social psychological questions, reasoning, social interaction, right? As beliefs, belief systems of people. And then October 7th happened. And Shai became prominent advocate for Jewish and Zionist Israeli rights in Columbia University, given the environment. It became very surprising, right? It was surprising.
It was shocking.
It was shocking.
Yeah.
It didn't go well. He got lots of criticism from the university administrators. Was a little bit alone in this thing, right?
Yeah. The criticism started from the administration, and then from the extreme left, and then from the extreme right.
Yeah, then from the extreme left. And now you've left. You didn't want to
July 2025.
You could have your in terms of publication, like your research outputs was insane. It was very good. Like you would have gotten tenure if it wasn't for this. And you've decided, or you've decided to stand up for what you believe in at a personal cost. And now you are. You're writing a book, right? Can I say that already? Or?
Yeah, just finished writing a book about the phenomenons that we're seeing on campuses. Called, I don't know yet what's the working title is American Intellectual Anti-Semitism.
And anti-Semitism turned out to be shockingly pervasive, unapologetic. There are lots of things we can talk about, like this. The context of this podcast course is I usually try to figure out people's beliefs in a given situation, not their emotions, but not their attitudes, but how do they see the world, and try to criticize it together.
Yeah.
But before we go into this cold reasoning, let's talk for a second about October 7th and where were you, and how did you?
You know, first of all, I should say that it's weird that two Israelis speaking in English, but I think it's good so other people can also hear it.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing about that. Sorry, I think that I didn't see you became famous for this thing a little bit.
Yeah.
And I didn't see people talk to you, or maybe there were by the talk to you in a reasoned voice, about the issues themselves, without a partisan lens. Without and we are both social psychologists. I thought this is a nice.
Yeah, no, I think it's great because when you approach every conversation, and I've done probably 100 interviews in 2 years, you kind of know where the person wants to take it.
Yeah.
And now, if they come from the right, then I try to bring a more leftist perspective, figure in the middle. If they come from the left, right? Yeah. But no one's just coming to say hey, what's going on? Let's figure it out without the
and no, I think the premise for us as social psychologists, we sometimes lose, of course, when I have my political belief systems, etc. We're fallible. We're very fallible as people, and we don't understand reality at its whole. None of us. And I think science allows us to have this perspective. So I really enjoy talking to people about these very charged issues, trying to be as scientific as I can. I'm not perfect, but I try to be.
I tell you, it's before you get to beliefs. The real problem, the emotion reason, the real problem that I've seen on campuses in the US, both on students and professors, and the professors is the more surprising part, is that theoretically, the way you're supposed to build your identity, the way I've been taught for years, is you have your values, right? Your core values, you believe in equality, you believe in whatever, religious, whatever it is, your values. Then based on your values, you have beliefs. You observe the world, you how the world, either fits or clashes with your values, you have beliefs. And then based on your beliefs, you react to immediate things in the world. And those are your opinions.
Yeah.
Right? And based on all of those things together, the hundreds of opinions you have, you figure out what is the identity that best fits most of my opinions. Right? And no identity will fit all of your opinions.
Yeah.
What I've seen happening in the US is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
You first have an identity. You almost like buy an identity off the shelf. That identity comes with like, here's the opinions you have to hold, then your beliefs, and then your values, but it all starts on your identity.
You know,
when you interview someone and you tell them like, I believe you were wrong, what they're hearing is your identity is bad.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's an emotional response.
Yeah, and there's like, I think, it's a real inversion of how we thought about beliefs and opinions and attitudes, right? And about truth in general. There's all of this discussion now about truth and Trump, etc. And in social psychology, for example, people have started to rethink this notion of truth. What is a truthful statement? Does it have to relate to a factual state of events, or does it relate to me saying that I'm candid in my support for this specific camp? So people say this candidate that I favor is truthful, even if they're lying. They completely believe it. Like they understand that he's saying something that is false, but they say this is a truthful person in saying something false because he's true to their identity, to their beliefs, and it's you can ask whether this was always the case a little bit, or whether this is a new phenomenon.
I think it's relatively new, and when you say relatively, we're talking decades. And of course, it may pop up in history many times. It's not that we invented the wheel, right? But the real, I think one of the big problems, and this is what you're describing is an influence coming from the humanities. And social psychology used to be influenced by the, more exact sciences. And in the past decades, it's been more influenced from the humanities. And the idea of no objective truth lies at the core of a lot of what we've seen on campuses. And not just about anti-Semitism, which is, it started with the idea that there are multiple perspectives on reality. And that was good because, for too many years, it was basically white, Christian, heterosexual male. And then we started saying, well, we have to listen to women's perspective. We have to listen to minorities' perspective, right? All these different things, which is important. And then the next step was each of these views have value, right? And which is true, right? Like even if someone I completely disagree with, their perception of reality has value for me and for reality. But then the next step was the problem, which saying each of these perspectives has equal value. And the moment you say everything has equal value, you're basically saying nothing has value, because value is based on some prioritization or some weighting. And that was the problem when everything has equal value, then truth no longer belongs to the objective reality. It just belongs to whoever either screams the loudest, convinces the most people, etc.
Yeah. So I think you can say that descriptively, the optimal picture that we want to have, this ideal of truth being fully or within our grasp through discussion was never the case. It was always to a certain extent, like the humanities critical theories, obviously, and you would agree, had a strong point in saying that biases exist and that people's perspectives are influenced by their position in society, their history. But there was this ethos that, okay, we suck, let's try to be better.
But notice how it's so interesting, because even something like the notion of we suck, right? You said, I think on October 7, it became clear when the idea of we suck, we should do better only applies to we, right? The question is, who's we?
Yeah.
I think you and I, when we study people, like social psychologists, we is every person, or we try at least. We can't reach every person, and we have cultural biases, but there is a very, very strong perception in critical race theory, in the postmodernism in the US, North America, is the idea that we suck is specifically we of Western, or what in social psychology called weird people. Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic people. Everyone else doesn't suck.
But I noticed people losing their humanistic perspective as a psychologist, which was very surprising to me. Like, I remember talking to a student and talking about the psychology of Trump supporters, which I was shocked that Trump was voted as a leftist, etc. And I talked to her about it. Listen, but you can understand the experience of white people in the United States, how they feel, blah blah blah. All of this research about, and you can understand that. And her response was just a student, a very smart student, said, "Yeah, but who cares? Like, who cares? Like, they've been the oppressors for so long. They've been privileged for so long, white Americans or white males, etc." And as and I said, yeah, you're right. If you are talking through like a specific lens of political conflict, of sociological conflict theories, but as a psychologist, it's a very weird position to hold. We are supposed to be about, even whether you're a social psychologist or a clinical psychologist, you're supposed to see humans as humans, right? This is your object of research, and humans with their shared humanity, with their shared pitfalls, with their shared, like, we all suck, like we all suck. That's the idea, and that was.
Yeah, but I'll in poker, like I'll see you and raise you one, and I think you're right. I mean, I think a lot of students have this reaction of like, who cares? It's they have it coming or whatever, and which is a dangerous proposition, because then the who cares then builds up to becoming who cares about October 7th, or on the opposite side, who cares about the civilians in Gaza, right? Exactly. Which is both are horrible. But I think the problem in academia is with the professors, and this is something that I've been guilty of. So I feel comfortable saying it, which is the natural question is we want to understand the psychology of Trump's voters. What do psychologists do? They try basically to understand what's to them is not normal. But you never hear a lot of psychologists saying, I want to understand the psychology of Biden supporters. I want to understand the psychology of Bernie Sanders supporters. So as an institution, we also have our own biases, and our students are raised in those biases. Now, the professor's biases should be at least more moderate than the student. What we're saying in the US is a bit different, but that's what the student is reacting to. When they see that their professors are only trying to understand the right because the right is weird, then the next reaction is the right is bad. By the way, and I'm sure in conservative universities you have the opposite.
I don't know how many.
Like in Liberty, when you have some, or like in more religious university.
And when I teach like the social psychology course, and I'm very critical of the right, because I, in the Israeli context, of course, see myself as a very left-wing. But I think my solution to this, which is, I don't know if the students like it or not, I'm very upfront about the fact that I'm fallible, the fact that I am now taking a position that I don't hold the complete truth, that we are together in this endeavor of trying to understand, am I wrong, am I right? So I do, like, I'm not in the context of a classroom, I try to maintain the epistemic humility while talking, while having my very strong opinions, but strong opinions loosely held. Like I will, and you can think otherwise, and it's fine. And I tell you, you can think very bad things. You can think very bad things in my mind, like really, and in Israel, obviously in the US as well. Some of my students think things that I think are very, very bad. And I can live with that, because I was like,
bad meaning what?
Meaning violent beliefs, having truly illiberal beliefs. And I will tell them, like, these beliefs are super inconsistent with my value systems, And if I was some other type of professor, maybe I would have, as a psychologist, as a social psychologist, like we are here to, your position matters, not in the position of not biasing people, but what is your role in society? My role in society is to understand the human experience and how it brings forth all sorts of negative things.
I think, so first of all, I would say, again, I would go back to saying, like, I don't identify anymore as a left wing.
Mm-hmm.
Not because the left have changed, but because, and the left has changed, right? But because I have changed. And I've realized that when I speak to students or an audience, nowadays it's more like, in general audiences,
Mm-hmm.
I try to connect with people based on our shared values, right? If I come as someone from an identity perspective, then I already cut the people to who's closer to me, people that share my identity, even though they might not share my values. Maybe their identity is reflexive.
Yeah.
So you also want to have that kind of conversation with people. And once you do that, then you also realize it's not necessarily a good or bad thing to be on one side or the other side. And you start thinking about it as more, okay, what are my rules for engagement? So I've made my rules just very simple because you don't want too many. It's no hate and no lies.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to talk with a right wing, a left winger, whatever winger, that as long as they base their conversation on facts,
Mm-hmm.
logic and facts, right? Because that's the only thing we can discuss and share. And as long as it doesn't come out of hatred towards the other side, whatever the other side is. And I find it's, again, you do find extreme right wingers and extreme left wingers. And the irony is, I think you get more pushback to Aviv University for a few, like, very right wing, maybe, that are,
Actually,
might be,
I don't get pushback, like, because, like, yeah, but
or you might find things that are a bit more like violent and illiberal, right?
yeah.
And from the extreme, more from the right.
Yeah, like the thing that in Israel that we worry about is the disregard to civilian life,
Right.
Palestinian civilian lives. Yeah.
And I yeah, exactly. And I think we should worry a lot
Yeah.
about that.
Mhm.
In the US colleges,
Mhm.
you get most of the pushback, the illiberal pushback from the
Yeah.
more from the left
Yeah. Mhm.
wing,
Mhm.
which is like a very
Yeah.
weird thing because
Weird.
I think you and I were raised in the idea that left equals liberal,
Mhm.
but it's not really. That's the liberal with the capital L rather than the
Yeah.
classic liberalism.
Yeah. So you said that lies and hates are not good, which I agree. The question is, and now the question is, can we tolerate some lies and some hate?
So as individuals or we as society?
We as society, we as individuals, we as discussants. It's not easy, and but I wonder. I lie, I hate, and I wonder whether it's possible. Like, I try not to too much, but my wife sometimes says, "Did you?" No, I no, you will also in conversation. Sometimes I to make a point. To make a point. Sometimes I will exaggerate. Sometimes I wonder whether we need to have also some tolerance to this aspect of humanity in discussion, although understanding it's problematic to a discourse.
I think not. So I don't hate.
Mhm.
And this is I'm not a saint. I'm not a especially good person, but that was a clear, deliberate decision I made on October 12th, 2023, when it was the first protest at Columbia University, and I saw hate.
Yeah.
Like when you see hate, especially when you see hate in a large, de-individuated, anonymous group, I decided then and there, I'm going to make the effort not to hate. And of course, it's not easy. Sometimes I feel that something bubbling because I do think hate clouds judgment of truth. And if my goal at the end of the day is reaching towards truth, then I have to say, here's the boundaries. Now, sometimes what seems as hate on the other side might be fear, anger, frustration. So I don't write off people immediately. But for example, when people start talking about they versus us, and a lot of my research was a zero-sum beliefs, that them versus us, and that easily gets to, dehumanizing them, superlatives to us, then hating them. And so I actually think there is no room for hatred in
but anger
normal.
fine.
Anger is fine.
This is I interviewed Ran Halperin here as well. Some of his work, I think, his earlier work talks about this important distinction between anger and hatred, where anger is very good for conflicts. Like if you're angry at the other side is great because it's not an essentialized emotion. It's not when you hate somebody, you attribute to them an essence, some sort of they are evil beings. So being angry, you're angry at this person,
and anger motivates action for change, right? Anger basically says something in this world isn't working, right? If you think about primarily, it's like there's something going to kill me, right? But something isn't working and I am going to try to change it, either by removing myself from the situation, right? That's the flight response, or trying to change the situation. That's the fight response. So there's a lot of, benefits to anger.
Yeah.
Whereas hatred, typically it's just blaming yourself for other people and also then trying to remove those other people because it becomes so caustic.
But for sure we are now at the time of hatred and anger. We can maybe we try to move from hatred to anger, and but anger
outrage. I think we're at the era of moral outrage, and I think that in social media also feeds on that.
And I personally am guilty as well. I get, to a certain extent, I essentialize, often I essentialize. It could be the Israeli right, and it could be the Palestinian society, it could be the American left. I essentialize. I study that as well in my research, but I essentialize. It feels good, and it's part of so when you encounter somebody who does that, what should you do? Like, you can't step away from the discussion, right? When you encounter let's say a person who supports Hamas on the 7th of October, okay? This is for us, this is unthinkable, right? And this was the shock, right? This was maybe let's talk about that for a second. Can you explain the shock that you felt, that I felt, that everybody felt?
It's hard to explain the shock, especially because of the chronology. Because now looking back, we've become desensitized to a lot of things that were shocking, which is a problem in and of itself.
And also afterwards, you would agree that the war was so harsh and violent and tragic, and
of course, and it's right. So then, like, the emotions run high, and then there's so many other emotions that it's hard to remember the core.
This moment,
the chronology is important because that's how it happened temporally.
And we were it was a shock.
It was a complete shock, and the shock for me was, I've been in the American education system for 15 years, PhD, postdoc job, another job. And I've seen it go through at least, I don't know if people cared, but the performative caring, so when Russia invaded Ukraine, Columbia's big library was lighted in blue and yellow. And that wasn't like all the universities. In 2015, when ISIS in the Bataclan and in Paris and everywhere, the bells of the church in university tolled at 12 o'clock, and there was 1 hour of just like mental health. So
mental health
for the students, right? Because this was an attack on
there
the
were
West.
Spanish students, and
What I expected was the same. I didn't expect like, oh, now Jews were being killed. It's different. It should be. I was just like, it's probably going to be the same. And to see the opposite reaction.
And it was the opposite reaction?
It was the opposite. For me, the big shock was, so I was on campus October 12th, and, just the slogans, and everyone's like talking about from the river to the sea. But to me, it was when you hear them say, we don't want 2 states, we want all of it. Or we don't want 48 on October 12th. We don't want 48, we want all of it. Again, the idea of the partition plan. And to me, it was like something opened in my mind, because I realized, like, if your reaction to a massacre is, this is the first shot for the goal that we hold, and that goal is held by my colleagues, that, and people and students, it just felt so out of place.
Yeah, I think
It just felt very out of place.
I think many of the people who criticized you, okay, or proponents of don't understand the level of shock. The level of shock. There was a shock from the October 7th, but it was shocking. It was horrible. But we've come to. It was a different level, but we've come to sort of live under violence. Every generation in Israel was involved and suffered violence. It was a lot, but this abandonment of liberal values, the notion that we thought we are part of a world that is good and rational and has problems. It's a completely different world than I believed we exist in. How can you march on campuses in support of a brutal terror attack? It was, and now I don't know, I wasn't there. I saw that. I was always questioning whether I'm getting a biased sample from Twitter or whether this is a reality. But
well, I think that's a false dichotomy, because the answer for both is yes. You are getting a biased sample. Just statistically, it's not that Twitter going or Instagram or whatever is going and just randomly picking people. It's the people that have the most to say or feel the most passionate or for whatever reasons. So you are getting a biased sample, and you are getting a more amplified version of whatever's happening because it's going through the microphone of social media. Yeah. At the same time, that doesn't make it real. It doesn't make that the truth. In the same way, if you take it to the other extreme, when you see the horrible violence by extremist right-wingers in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, which already the words reflect like the politics, you're seeing them, you're seeing articles about them, you're seeing videos of them, and that's reality, and it's also amplified. Yeah. The difficulty is, how do we deal with the reality, with the core, and also keep in mind that it's not the whole world. Yeah. And how do we don't become Pollyannish and say, well, it's not the whole world, so who cares? It's just a fringe. But actually, that fringe is very dangerous if it spreads. Yeah. But we can't be alarmists.
Yeah, and you have to maintain the proportion into something also that is really difficult to do, to understand. And I think for me, the evidence again waxed and waned. Initially, 7th of October. And then some, Bono gives talks at a concert, and Biden says they don't, and you feel that you're not completely alone. And then you see the demonstrations, etc. Wait, what's going on? This is shocking. Then, okay, you see the outrage, but you say, okay, but Israel is now behaving in a way that is inconsistent with my value system, so maybe it's actually... And then the wars, then you see now... For me, the coin dropped. Do you say that in English as well?
Like the other shoe dropped?
Yeah. Recently, when I saw Dave Chappelle's stand-up special, did you see it?
I've stopped watching him when he became racist against white people.
So he's a chauvinist. He's parochial, but super funny.
Yeah, of course. I don't take it from him. I don't want to waste my time.
And somebody, and you have to give stand-up its place to play with dangerous thoughts and dangerous ideas. There is a way to do it. I think he crossed the line earlier, but in his latest stand-up special, basically it ends with an argument that everybody's trying to silence him, blah blah blah. Nobody will silence him. But if he ever says I stand with Israel, then you should know that basically the Jews have taken him. Okay, and that was, and he gets a massive applause and laugh. Obviously, it's also a funny joke. Yeah. And it's on Netflix, and the normalization of this now means that this is, for me, no longer no longer Columbia, no longer elite universities. This has become prevalent on the right, on the left. So some and sorry for talking so much, because actually for me this means that actually this was not alarmism. Your reactions on the campus was not alarmism. It's not even about Jews. It's not even about Jews because something is going completely wrong with the liberal world in its ability to deal with reality. And
for me, it really was, yes, the immediate reaction was, I think for a lot of people that have children, was how do I make sure that the world is safe for my kids when they grow up? At the time, I had like 11 years till my son will be, if we stay in the US, in college. But even if we don't, like, I can do two things. Like, I can teach my son that there's certain aspects of his identity as Jewish, Israeli, as a Zionist, he should hide, or I should change the world so he shouldn't hide it, right? The same thing if my son was gay or if my son, whatever is. And that was my first shock. But then the second shock and the deeper shock was the betrayal of the truth, right? Like, I don't care if people are angry for the right reasons, but when they are angry for a distorted reality that's no longer the truth, that when things become a bit more complicated for me. And and if you look at someone like Dave Chappelle and his whole, like, the Jews control everything. So first of all, we know it's not true, right? We know that yes, there are Jewish people disproportionately in entertainment, in whatever, all those stuff, finances. Yes, we also have the history of why, right? It's not a centralized because there's something about Jews, but also the history of why we're in these kind of professions. But we also know it's not true. Like, the vast majority of people in entertainment are non-Jews.
Yeah.
But the moment the lie becomes the truth to then make joke about. Also, like, you can't cancel me. Like, a person getting hundreds of millions of dollars to, talking about how people try to cancel him, he's creating a lie, which then he attacks the lie. And to me, that's a problem as a professor.
Yeah, it's for sure. It should be, we see it everywhere. We don't see it only in the left. We don't see it only in the right. I see it also in the Israeli left oftentimes when it comes to real problems that we have here. Sometimes social media or I don't know just generates such abandoning of the attempt to be proportional. There is always a kernel of truth that you can magnify, and I have a few lectures now on the notion of proportionality on alarmism. Is the judicial overhaul now turning Israel into a dictatorship, or is it a really major problem we need to address and fight against, etc., or is this the end of the world?
You notice, sorry to cutting you up, but there's also an interesting dynamic, which I'm not sure exactly what the dynamic is, but the alarmists play into the hands of the people on the other side.
Yeah.
Right? So you have alarmists from the left talking about something the right is doing, or alarmists from the right talking about the left is doing. And because they are so alarmed about it, they fight it. So then the other side feeds on it, and almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, all of a sudden the alarmists say, see, we told you so. Whereas the people on the other side say, you see, they're crazy. That's why we needed this from the first one.
Great. So I'm going to challenge you a bit. Sorry. But for example, when Iran Halperin was here, Iran, right? So Iran is obviously highly involved in fighting Netanyahu and the judicial reform and fighting for peace here in Israel. And you talk to him. I raised the possibility before him that we, as the left in Israel, have lost some of our proportion. That we're doing that we're feeding into Bibi's hands by focusing so much on him. By when there was ilat hasvirut, as they say in English, like the judicial, like small things in the judicial overhaul became reasons for. I said this alarmism. Is part of what is feeding into the power of the Netanyahu government that I don't like and think is doing horrible things, and also clouded our ability to wage the war in a way that is consistent with liberal values, I think. And I think, is it possible?
What was Iran's response?
Iran Iran's response is, I think he generally agrees that there is that proportionality is important, that you should be tied to the truth, calibrated as much as possible, that you should strive to interact with people and find the best of the other side, etc. But he thinks that sometimes the Nazis are coming and that you have to take off the gloves.
Right.
I think, I don't know, maybe I'm paraphrasing, I don't know, maybe Iran, if I'm not, maybe it's not Iran and some other people I've talked to in this context, but something like that.
I think the problem is that, you know, when you have children,
Yeah.
right? And when your kids react out of proportion, the only way for them to know that they're reacting out of proportion to something is for someone else outside of the situation to tell them that.
Yeah.
By definition, any institution that is swayed almost predominantly to one side, either if it's left like the academia or right, like, you know, right now in the police, whatever, you are going to have disproportionality because you're not going to have the people from the other side saying, wait, let's look at all this other evidence that you are not looking because we're all looking from the same direction.
For sure.
So you're always going to have that level. And the goal should always be to diversify in terms of views and perspectives and values the people that you're with so that you can get the right proportion.
For sure. And but the question now is this, and I'm not trying to be critical. I'm trying to think of it. Do you think that there were situations where when the justified surprise, shock, pushback against illiberal, truthless, violent perspectives in campus, do you think there were situations where you lost the proportionality of it?
I think that it's not so much losing the proportionality as much as is the response not being pragmatic, right? You can still have proportion and know and have like a very clear view, and yet in your response feed into that cycle. And I think that there might be some stuff where I have let, you know, in my reaction to the world, my emotion for better
No, you think
so my emotions like steer me in a bigger way than I would have wanted to, which then just puts more emotion out into the world, right? Like you know, when I would like raise my voice, where maybe if I kept my voice not as raised, then I would get farther across. At the same time, you know, because we don't have the counterfactual, it could be that the only way to crack the noise is to raise your voice, right? So you wanna have those two things together. But I think that again, if you focus not on the what is happening right now, like, but more of like, what is the idea? What is the issues that you're trying to solve here? Then I think that's a good way to at least keep yourself somewhat grounded in proportionality.
Yeah.
And I think that was the problem, by the way, we're not going to get too much into the war itself, I guess, but that when any goal has they had two goals, right? All the hostages and the destruction of Hamas. And when you have two goals, you can always stay disproportionate, because when you're getting proportionally closer to the one, you're not going to, unless you're achieving them in the same way, your actions are disproportionate for the other. So you're always going to create that, and it leaves space for people to act disproportionately.
Yeah.
And you get like what Paul Slovic called like it's like classic compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
Right. You have compassion for, you know, on both sides, right? And then the numbers get growing, or maybe the numbers are very different in Gaza versus in Israel. But the evil, you know, gets growing. Like, you know, one side is more evil in its actions, one side is more effective in killing, and the other. And then you get the compassion fatigue, and then people are saying, well, I can't feel for everyone. I might as well not feel at all.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, let's get back to trying to feel something.
Yeah, it's the problem. That's the huge problem of the confounding. You know, as researchers, we try to unconfound variables. And here you have such a huge confound of anti-Semitism and occupation and a devastating war that is truly horrible, and a devastating a mini genocide on the October 7th. And you have, just like everything is confounded. A person who just watches the situation as an observer should be confused. Yes. And I think that oftentimes there is a real joy in saying, well, this is confusing. Actually, it's so simple.
Right.
Actually, it's so simple. I figured it out. And it's actually the Jew. Or it's actually the Palestinians that were evil from day one.
When it comes to Israel and Israel's actions, it's not an on-off button on anti-Semitism, it's a volume button.
Yeah.
Right? It would be crazy for anyone to argue that whatever Israel's government does has no effect on how Jews are seen around the world. Like, it's crazy because it's statistically not right.
Yeah.
You see on October 7th, the war starts. October 8th, the world, starts. Same in 2021, 2019, 2014, 2012. But at the same time, it's a volume button. It's an on-off button. I go on and I tell people the analogy is like, if you destroy the land of Israel, you're not destroying you're just sticking it on whatever volume it sticks.
Yeah.
So maybe now you don't even have a volume.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I always thought that anti-Semitism is at its core the anger or envy of a group that is closed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you go, I give people the metaphor, if you go in New York City and you see a club and it sounds really fun inside and there's a red line, red tape, and you want to come in and say, I want to come in and say, no, sorry, it's members only.
Yeah.
And you say, well, I have a lot of money. No, you can't buy your way in. Well, I know these people. No, you can't. It's not connections.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to get on the list. Okay, how long is the list? 2 years, right? The conversion. People don't like that. So you take that idea of people looking at our group, and our group, that's how we survived, is the somewhat particularism and closeness. And you take Leon Pinsker in Auto-Emancipation talks about how we are seen by the world, we were exiled in, 132 Common Era, and we're supposed to die, like all the Hittim, the Moabim, but we didn't die. We became, like he calls it, like an apparition, like a ghost, like a people without a land, without a body, right? Now once we have a country of our own, the Jewish homeland, we were supposed to stop being in the diaspora, right? So we didn't die. The ghost didn't die. So I think that mixture of suspicion of why are they like this? Like, why are they so closed? And what makes them survive so long creates this animosity.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, it creates a weird obsession with Jews as well, like positive, like Deborah Lipschitz calls like a pro-Semite is an anti-Semite that likes Jews.
Yeah.
And there's always going to find reasons for the hatred.
Yeah.
Now, should we listen to those reasons and take them wholehearted? No, because it's never going to end.
Yeah.
At the same time, if we just say everything is anti-Semitism, we have nothing to learn from it, then we are not going to get better.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like in the same thing that Obama famously, when he was elected, first African-American president, it's such a big thing. And he had like this whole speech about for African-American young men, like pull up your pants, start working, referring to like this culture in inner cities, mostly not only, but mostly, led by African-American teen. He wasn't being racist.
Yeah.
He was just saying, here's an observation that doesn't talk about the majority.
Yeah.
So we need to look at those kind of things as well.
Yeah. No, the question of anti-Semitism, it's become interesting to me. Listen, it's interesting. And I think one of the things that is disappointing when you talk to smart people is, and I'm sure you would agree, as social psychologists, we are very keenly aware of implicit biases, of how perceptions of people are dominated by all sorts of non-conscious narratives, also all sorts of construals that go back ages. And when people talk about the perception of blacks and Asians, etc., like it's obvious, and you can talk to people who are say I'm like social psychologists and say no, what I'm talking about now is the facts. There is no my perception of this as being A or B is not colored somehow by any sort of latent underlying perceptual biases that I might have that go way beyond my lifetime even, that goes back thousands of years. How can you, as a rational person, as a social psychologist, not see this core thing in your discipline in influencing your perception of a current reality? How can you say that I am an objective now? How can you have this naive realism, right? That was astounding to me.
But again, like for me, it's astounding. But to me, that's not the real problem, because we're all looking at the facts that we have available, the facts that we collect in our research, whatever it is. The problem is not that. The problem is that people are refusing to accept additional facts. Not, you say like, the Kuhn's, the theory of paradigm shifts, right? The whole idea that you have your facts and you create a theory of reality based on the facts. And then more people bring in more facts. And if your theory doesn't work, at some point you have to say, you know what, my theory is wrong. Rather than trying to either push away the facts, right? The whole, like, for example, the argument that Jews are not indigenous to the land of Israel, right? Because, about 150 years ago, most Jews started coming back from Europe, therefore they're not from here. And then you come and say, you know what? It's true that if you start history in 1864, Jews are not indigenous. If you started in before, they are indigenous. What do you do about the fact that it's called Judea and Samaria, or that the name predates Palestine? Doesn't mean that Palestinians are not in their way indigenous. Now, a truthful academic would say, you know what? Okay, how do I make, I guess I need to either change what indigenous means. That's what they do. And that's not fair, because it's saying the facts don't fit, so I'm going to change the words to fit in the facts. Or push away the facts altogether. Or be realistic and say, you know what? Maybe my view isn't correct, because there is some indigenous part here. Right?
Yeah. And you observed this upfront also from respected colleagues, people you thought are smart, rational. Did you, like, how big is the problem that you observed? If you try to be as proportional as possible, and now with some distance of time, right, and space.
So I would say two things. We have two problems. An acute problem that's relatively smaller, and a less acute problem that's much bigger within our colleagues. The acute problem is we have a fringe, yet growing, because I don't look at numbers, I look at trends, growing number of professors and mostly postdocs and graduate students who have been, they've bought into an ideology, and their research is driven by the ideology. And that is a problem. They tend to also be the ones that are more active politically in like academic associations. They're the ones that volunteer for conferences to check posters, reviewers. So even though they're small by number, their effect is stronger. And we also know this because this is the same thing that happened in sociology and anthropology and the humanities, right? So that's the acute problem. But the bigger problem is the vast majority of our colleagues that have been quiet, that teach about the bystander intervention, they teach about conformity, they know the problems. When there's anti-Black racism, they speak out. When there's anti-Asianism, they speak out. Homophobia, it's important to speak up. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but then when it comes to anti-Semitism, they say it's complicated, and they keep quiet. Not realizing that these are the same things we teach our students not to do. To me, that's the bigger problem, because not only is, I'm not the first one to say that evil is done by indifferent people, but because we are the people that are supposed to teach society not to do that. And we undercut our own integrity by teaching one thing and acting in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, also noticed this early on, I don't know, from afar, here in Israel, there wasn't, I was also surprised by the lack of recognition immediately afterwards. Maybe it happened within, I don't know, maybe there were no like discussions on US campuses on the horrors of, I don't know, in social psychology context. There wasn't any sort of, immediately it moved towards the context of occupation.
I think I would say like 3 or 4 weeks, I may be getting the dates wrong, but 3 or 4 weeks after October 7, I was supposed to go to the Society of Experimental and Social Psychology, and I was broken. Like we were all broken, and I think most Israelis didn't show up. I was organized, like I was part of a symposium, and I wrote a letter of why I'm not coming. And part of it is like just pointing out, like, here's what happened, right? Because nobody was talking about it. And the person that I asked to read it said, like, it didn't feel right. Now, if an African-American professor, after George Floyd, said, I'm really sorry, I can't show up because on this and that date, George Floyd, and, you know, it's shocking, etc. No one would say, oh, it's not fitting to start a symposium this way. For good reasons, because especially if we're talking about humans happening, you know, working in a world.
Yeah.
And that was just a tiny example. If anything, you saw, like, there was just an uproar of all of a sudden people that are taking this oppressor-oppressed perspective to social psychology. All of a sudden, you have mini conferences dedicated to what's happening in Gaza. And you know what? And that's important.
Yeah.
But from a certain perspective that assumes blame and assumes guilt before even starting. When and you and I think entered the field around the same time. The early 2010 was when I started my PhD.
Something like that.
And
2008.
Back then, there was conversation about people of different groups need their own safe areas, safe spaces to have open conversation, right? So there was, you know, you go to a conference and there's room for PhD students from African-American PhD students and PhDs from Asian American. But then slowly it became people of color room and then everyone else. And it became like a segregation from inside, which was very illiberal. But it was never like people who believe in more conservative view. The diversity was always based on color, based on melanin. It was never based on having like ideas and conversation.
Like I was, you know, this for Israelis, you know, this is such a distant world because our problems are way on the opposite side of it, right? So, and it didn't really seep into the world here, but so I remember you gave a talk about diversity here at Tel Aviv University, and I was like, yeah, okay, like it was great work experimentally. It was but this, you know, so much work about diversity. Like, okay, I understand it's important in the, like, sorry for the.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's the goal was for me, and this is where I was always a bit, let's say I was primed to be willing to take the price of speaking up.
Yeah.
Because I was always like, when I studied economic mobility, and my paper, I think it was my second paper ever, it had like a subheading and it said, both conservatives and liberals are wrong. We had to fight to put that in.
Yeah, really.
Because our evidence, you know, showed that conservatives do one mistake, liberals do another mistake. And as you imagine, the reviewers were angry with only half of that.
Yeah.
And we had to, like, or when you do it by diversity, like the idea that we're studying a psychological phenomena. I personally, I care about, you know, race, gender, etc. But as a psychologist, I care about what is the psychology behind the brain. I don't care if it's black, white, purple, green. Like, I don't care.
No, for sure.
I generally think that the future of academia is in danger, and most academics look to the extreme right to like say, look, they are going after us, instead of looking for inside and saying, oh, the problems from within are going to kill us, not the problems from without.
Maybe why not both?
Why not both? Yeah.
But do you think there is any sort of rationale of enforcing diversity, political, ideological diversity in hiring and stuff like that, or?
I am a very strong believer in equality of opportunity and trying to equalize opportunity as much as possible. Now, typically what happens is, and I've seen this a lot in my research, we get students in, like I would get an MBA, right? And in MBA, and there is on average, you take two different groups, and I don't care which groups are, but there's an average difference between the two groups. It doesn't mean that there's not a lot of variance and some people from one group, but there's a difference. And we say, well, but that's how we got them from undergrad. And then the undergrad professor, that's how we got them from high school. And the high school is saying with us, and at some point we have to say, you know what, that's fine, but we need to make sure the opportunities are right. What I would typically see at Columbia, before that at the New School, is the opposite, saying almost like bean counting. We need someone to represent this community, let's hire them. But the moment we're in, let's throw them into the water and not help them in any way. And then when they go and get a job on the job market, there's also an average difference because they carry it with them. Instead of us saying, we're going to take people from different groups and we're going to give them as much opportunities as possible so the gap is closed or even maybe flipped.
And do you think there's actual rationale to do this based on to try and equalize the political makeup? It's a problem, right? It's
no, I actually think I think so. And my reasoning for ideological diversity in academia has nothing to do with fairness and justice.
Just epistemologically.
Even more, it's for my own good. Because right now, the arguments, take whatever, the biggest, divisive issues in American academia, and I'm sure the same happens in Israel, if it's gender identity, if it's guns, if it's abortion, the arguments on the left are very, very bad, very lazy. Why? Because there are no smart people from the right in the room to challenge them.
Yeah.
If anything, what typically happens is that people write an article where they create a strawman argument from the other side. The reviewers are from their side, and they're arguing a bit against a strawman. Now, if you had, and I'm not saying 50-50 because academia does tend to sway liberal, but if you had 20% or 30% professors disagree on any conservative issue, liberal-ish, whatever, all of a sudden the liberals have to work harder to make their argument. And that means that someone like me who on certain social views is liberal will have to work harder to get to, and if not, change my mind.
Yes. But then the problem becomes, now I will perhaps challenge you a bit, and then what about the sides of the spectrum that you see as completely outside of normal? I don't know, some professors at Columbia, let's think of which ones were the cases of the most
the most extreme was Joseph Massad, who on October 8th published an article saying he experienced jubilation and awe. It was basically praising and a picture of Hamas terrorists in his article. It was crazy. It was really crazy.
So, what do you do with that?
So those are the most complicated ones.
I can say that's diversity. A lot of people think this way.
Yeah, so I would say...
Or let's do alternatively, somebody here in Israel that thinks the government is too soft and that Ben Gvir is a wuss and that you should have,
Yes.
A person like this that thinks.
So I know in the US that there are mechanisms. And the mechanisms are not necessarily formal mechanisms. They are social mechanisms. Because if the day after George Floyd got murdered, you'd write an article about how happy you saw watching those 9 minutes, you'd be immediately maybe if you're tenured, so you don't lose your job, but you can't teach anymore, you can't supervise, you can't do on any committees. The academia knows how to deal with that when it wants to deal with that.
No.
When it doesn't want to
the
deal
question
with
is
that,
whether so theoretically it could be as free speech absolutist to say that even in these cases.
And I tell people it's okay if we want a free speech academia, then I'm happy.
But it's not.
Look at Twitter, see what happens. Then if you want that, that's fine. But you can't have an academia with free speech in certain places and not in others, because then it becomes ideological.
And that's where the cases, the hearings against the university leaders became all they said was very against the person from MIT and from Pennsylvania and Columbia as well. Was there?
Not Columbia. She didn't go that day, but you went later. Yeah.
The arguments were, good arguments for free speech, and the problems of dealing with diversity of opinions, and they gave, but it was inconsistent with past behavior. It was inconsistent with how they reacted to Black Lives Matters, and
I think I have a good friend. She's a poet, and she says she writes, "Free speech is never so free as this when it's hate speech against the Jews." And that's such a strong, I think people out in Israel don't really realize what's happening in the US. Because when you ask people in the US, what's the most famous free speech argument about protest? And they say Skokie, Illinois. So which is a case where neo-Nazis wanted to intentionally march inside a Jewish Orthodox community. And the Supreme Court says they can do it because of free speech. So I tell people, the only other argument for why you should march against Jews now is because you could march against the Jews before. Yeah. Like, if you show me an argument that says, KKK marching in a black neighborhood, Western Baptists marching in Chelsea, predominantly LGBTQ neighborhood, then I would say, you know what? We're in equal standards for everyone. But you have in a society of double standards, that's the problem. That's the, go back to what's the anti-Semitism. It's the double standards.
Yeah. And I wonder sometimes, okay, and let's try to be now self-critical. We are appalled by the cheapness of Israeli life suddenly, right? And how it became, I was appalled. I try to think sometimes through this perspective on how radical thinkers on the other side come to be as radicalized as they do. Yeah. When the cheapness of lives on the other side becomes so pronounced, and then you lose liberalism as a. So again, I can't speak for like Christian, white, privileged people who are, these are anti-Semites, I think, oftentimes, unless they're ignorant. And but when I see Joseph Massad, for example, let's try to be empathetic towards Joseph Massad. Can we, I don't know, it's disgusting to me as a human, it's disgusting to say jubilation. Maybe you didn't know exactly what was happening. Let's try to be, but I want, and it's illiberal. It's inconsistent with the liberal system of thinking that you can target civilians. I see this in Israel all the time as well. I see this, I don't care whether they kill 1,000 children, 100,000 children.
It becomes illiberal. I would say
it's completely normalized. But it's completely normalized.
I want to point out an assumption you're making, which is that people assume academia needs to be liberal. Liberal. So there's an assumption that academia is or should be liberal, but open to different ideas and the open market of ideas and the best ideas win and logic. But
humanism, humanistic.
But I don't think that's the assumption in many of the universities right now in the US. The assumption is social justice. Now, justice can be liberal, but it doesn't have to be liberal, right? How justice is needed when you switch oppressor and oppressed, right? So all of a sudden you say, now it's justice. Sometimes, in the idea of social justice, you have to be illiberal towards the liberals to create social justice. So if we are to come back to a point of pure liberalism, then I think we should have people like Joseph. Maybe Joseph Massad is so extreme. And just like people who say kill them all in Gaza are so extreme. But we should have very horrible views. The problem is, as an institution, we should have some equalize.
Yeah, for sure. No, the thing that I'm saying is, I think that sometimes I hear these horrible views in Israel, and then a person tells me, think of Shiri Bibas, think of, you see how they got there. And you want to say in a very reasoned and cool voice, listen, man, you can't go there. This is too much. I can see you as a human. I can understand where you got to this point. But the system somehow needs to stay stoic, to stay somehow composed and understand what you're saying now doesn't perhaps make you an evil person. It's a response to something, but I just can't.
Yeah,
can't.
But that's where social psychology comes in. Is that you can understand someone and still hold them responsible.
Yeah.
I tell, like in my experience, I tell people like, okay, you say everyone. What about babies that were just born yesterday? Okay, not baby. What about, people with mental challenges that have no idea what's going on? What about 90-year-old? So you say, okay, so we're not talking about everyone. No. So you'll give me, like Abraham saying like, what if there's only 10 people that are just in Sodom and Gomorrah? What if there's one person? So you start having that conversation, you realize, okay, so it's not all. So already we're talking about subcategories. So it's not the Palestinians. The other thing I tell people, and I'll close with this, is the one thing that people on the right and the left agree on is education. When I talk to people on the right, they say, you can't deal with them. You need to kill them all. They're educated from the first moment we're born to be this way. If we talk to people on the left, they say, well, you can't blame them. It's not their fault. They're educated from the first born to be this way. So the right and the left agree on the process that leads to it. Yeah. And they agree on the solution. We need education. Who will run the education? What will be? Those are second order questions. The education is the problem. Yeah. And that's how we're going to get to the solution, I believe. Yeah. Same in the campuses in the US. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we solved everything.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming. I wish we had more time because I would have wanted to
summer.
Yeah, maybe
come back.
Okay, and so thanks a lot.
Tel Aviv 360, Israel's largest and most diverse podcast.